Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's wonderful to have you join us for this third and final closing session of today's one-day high-level seminar on industry decarbonisation, co-hosted by the Mission Possible platform, the World Economic Forum, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for the Government of Denmark. So we've had an incredibly rich discussion during the past sessions, and we've just come from a deep dive session with some of the world's experts on industry decarbonisation, where we've looked at three industry sectors: aviation, shipping, and cement. We will shortly hear from some of the discussion leaders on what were the main findings in each of those deep dives. But this session will also be a forward-looking one. We want to particularly look ahead over the next 8 months in this dash to COP26 in Glasgow to explore how we really can maximise tangible, sector-level deliverables and industry outcomes as part of that process to effectively set us up for the marathon that will follow to 2025 and 2030. We all know that reaching net zero emissions from heavy industry and heavy duty transport sectors is technically and financially possible by 2050. We have the technologies. We just know, as Bill Gates articulates so well, that there is a green premium associated with these. We need to scale those technologies to bring down the cost of that green premium. So it requires action-orientated and powerful coalitions, bringing together public and private sectors, as well as key stakeholders across the full value chain, to align around a shared vision for net zero with concrete and measurable targets. For this, we will also hear from some eminent industry leaders from the industry sectors and from the high-level champions in the panel after the discussion leaders debrief. We will also hear from our co-host, the Foreign Minister of Denmark, Jeppe Kofod, who will join us shortly. But before that, let's hear back from our discussion leaders and capture some of those insights from the three breakouts. First, I'd like to invite Christoph Wolf to provide the feedbacks from the aviation group.
Thank you very much. As I'm the first, how much time do I have, Anthony?
Probably a couple of 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay,
to that.
Right. Yeah, so thank you very much. So we had in a way in our group today is a meeting of the Clean Skies of Tomorrow initiative, which has 100 stakeholders around the globe across the whole value chain, public, privates. We work with governments, with the global regulators, with the EU Commission on building the Green Deal framework, with ICAO, how to take that to the long-term goal in 2022, with the COP Cabinet Office on how to stage this whole topic at COP. And the key message is, first of all, while aviation was seen in the past as a heavy to abate sector that may not actually make it from its own forces to a net zero, and that's therefore had to rely entirely on carbon offsets. The message is, and the dynamics is, that it's possible. You've seen announcements like the One World Alliance saying we want to go to net zero in 2050. That's one of the three big airline alliances. There's a Race to Zero, a grouping that includes key actors like the Heathrow Airport or Rolls-Royce as a key engine manufacturer and others. And you have seen the Airbus announcement that by 2035, actually hydrogen flying may be possible. And until that scales, it will probably be 2040 or more. And that may actually then basically maybe take care of like 10 to 20% of the volume. So, but sustainable aviation fuel is actually the key element to move there. Yeah. So, to addition to efficiency and potential hydrogen flying, Denmark has working on this in the climate partnership, has done actually excellent work. It's very much focused, as we understand, because of the access to energy and to wind power on the power to liquid route, the e-fuel route. Yeah, for other countries around the globe, other routes like the bio-based route, second generation biofuels may also be important. And we should remember this is a global endeavor where actually 193 countries need to agree on that. Yeah, so there's an equity issue in there because obviously emerging markets need to become fuel producers and need to be assured that they are the cost of connecting their citizens to the global arenas may not suddenly skyrocket, and they can't actually be connected to the world anymore. And there's a lot more folks that want to fly. So there's an equity issue. So focus on the technology pathway. Sustainable aviation fuel is elegant. It can be blended. You start with 5%. It almost has no impact on customer prices. And then you bring it up while economies scale. So it's actually easier than in shipping, yeah, where you have to rebuild the whole propulsion system. We do work with India for a blueprint. ICAO has done work with Kenya and with Dominican Republics. You want to scale that. You want to build. You have connection now with the UAE, with Singapore, with Brazil and Chile, in order to build these kind of domestically grounded routes forward. How actually aviation can be zero carbon. Policy framework is key. So the EU Green Deal, I think we're succeeding in embedding a blending mandate into the EU Green Deal ruling for that's coming out next year. We are very close in working on designing the mandate. We think it should be at 10%. We feel that's very important. I think the EU is currently, we have to bring them from, they currently think 5% is sufficient. We think that in order to set an example also for the world in ICAO in 2022, it needs to be more ambitious. We're working on that. And we discussed in that in the breakout also the role of the demand side actors. So there's a big role for private commitments of the global community that wants to continue flying, the tech, the banking, the professional services, and they're willing to buy SAF if there's a marketplace for that, and they get credited and actually build demand, independent of regulation. And that could be a super important actually trigger or a ramp up in order to get out of the chicken and egg problems that if there's no demand for sustainable aviation fuel, there's no supply. So this is actually a cornerstone of that. We had a great conversation about that. The freight sector, like the DHLs and Kühne and Nagels, could build buyers clubs actually to take that forward. And the last thing is the finance sector is obviously very important, and we're in the process of basically working with the finance sectors like the Poseidon principles in shipping in order to basically build a framework for lending and investing of the key commercial banks of this planet that is in line with net zero commitments. And that means that they will only gradually invest into airlines or into airports or into actually SAF plans right away that would make sure that this net zero aviation is happening. As a tagline, was a great session. I think we are happy to connect the Danish ecosystem, which has been a huge commitments and great work, more closely to the international community, and we're very much looking forward to working together on all these areas: technology, policy, and finance and building demand. Thank you very much.
Christoph, thank you. And so from aviation to shipping, Johanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Anthony, and thank you for the opportunity. I can only build on what Christoph has already said for aviation. So first of all, I want to echo the urgency of the challenge, and that was really an important point stressed by our group, by our breakout group. We have to replace a lot of fossil fuels with new types of fuels that will, a large portion of which will likely be powered by renewable energy or based on renewable energy, and it's incredibly urgent. So all the tracks that for this transformation and for this transition need to be laid in this decade in order for us to meet the goals that have been set for 2050. So much work needs to be done on a really urgent timescale. We need to work fast. Another important perspective, and Christoph touched a little bit on this for the aviation sector as well, is this idea of looking at full value chain perspectives and full supply chain perspectives. The World Economic Forum and BCG published a report recently that made a really interesting point, which is around this idea that the cost of abatement at the upstream, at that end of the value chain, the profit margins are really, really low. But if you look at the other end of the value chain, the profit margins are actually quite high in comparison to the cost of abatement. So in other words, we need to think about how we mobilize those that have the large profit margins to help drive the decarbonization upstream in their supply chains. And there's already pockets of demand that's being identified. I think Maersk has been quite clear about identifying that and articulating that that already exists, but it's still quite limited. So we need to work together to engage that those more that end of the value chain and to build demand for green freight, much like is the case in the aviation sector as well. And another important point that was raised by the group was the need for a first big wave of commercial scale demonstration projects that can test and create confidence in new technologies, in innovations, but almost more importantly, can secure offtake for fuels, because shipping is actually quite far along already and has the volume and potential to be catalytic for a lot of the new fuels and new technologies that need to become available for many other sectors to transition as well. So through large-scale demonstration projects, we can start building that offtake and that security that fuel producers need to overcome the chicken and egg problem that Christoph just touched upon. And finally, I think most importantly, the role of government and regulation in driving this change. So the private sector can do a lot, and we've seen that in the context of the Getting to Zero Coalition, where close to 200 members of the Getting to Zero Coalition are already working together to make this change happen. But the cost of the transition is high, and we need to figure out how we can share that cost across value chains, but also across stakeholders in the ecosystem. And so there are many different ways that can be done, but it can be through public procurement to kickstart the transition. I think Norway has done some great strides in that regard, and I know Denmark has done the same in other contexts by investing in zero emission infrastructure, in particular energy infrastructure, much like we've seen it in Denmark as well, to help build and bring to help to build the availability of future fuels and to bring down the costs. And then, of course, regulatory frameworks that close the competitiveness gap between our current system and what we're transitioning to, the future green solutions. And there are lots of things that have come up in previous discussions throughout the day, but that could be price on carbon. There can be other types of frameworks that can unlock the transition. And then finally, I think a point that's important to make is that in this context as well is aligning international goals at the International Maritime Organization, which regulates shipping, with those of the Paris Agreement, will also be an important catalytic effect.
Johanna, thank you. And so from heavy transport, we're going to make a step change to materials. And we're going to talk about feedback from the cement session. And I learned I think we learned two interesting things in the previous session. You can't talk about industry transition without using the word concrete or cement at some point. But perhaps more interesting than that, Michael Thompson, the managing director for Aalborg Portland Cement in Denmark, made a point I hadn't actually realized, that after water, cement is the most used material in the world. So, Dina, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Anthony. Yes, it is true that it's concrete is the second most used material in the world, and the one that's it's absolutely crucial to the sustainable building world, building the sustainable world of tomorrow. So I'm a newcomer to this whole world, and it's just incredible how much it percolates our daily life. I just got off a panel where I followed from Johanna, so I know that I'm going to repeat things that were said in other sessions, which is very interesting to me. In the aviation and the shipping, the themes that came through are very similar, with a couple of little twists to them. The first one to sort of mention is the sense of urgency, and that we just cannot wait to start this work. And another really crucial theme is the absolutely crucial role of government in making sure that we transition to carbon neutrality. And I guess the final one that I heard Lord Adair Turner say across it is that a rather optimistic, he said, in hard to abate sectors, we can get to zero carbon. So, you know, we're all worrying and worrying about the policy steps and all the things that need to be done. But the fact is, across these three sectors, we're confident that with the right partnerships, we will get to carbon neutrality. And that's a great idea. But to jump into the concrete and cement industry session, first thing to say is that we as a sector really value the idea of circular economy. And so I would plead everyone on the call, it's more than a technical distinction, that it's not just cement, but it is cement and concrete. Concrete is the product. The cement is the flour that makes the bread, but the cement and the concrete are really important to think about hand in hand and across the whole value chain of this product, not just at the production part, but into the built environment and into the recycling of the products after their use. So circular economy was something that we talked about quite a lot. And then into the very specifics of what the breakout sessions said. What came out loud and clear and was not quite as obvious to me before this session was the absolute need to ensure a supply of green and affordable and available energy to facilitate the transition to carbon neutrality. I heard Michael say that there's a talk of a need to go from 70 million tons of hydrogen production today to 700 million by 2050 in order to achieve our goals. So that was before anything else, people said we needed to make that transition and make sure that energy transition, affordable green energy, was number one in people's minds. From our industry, we split it up into three levels. We thought about the short term, the medium term, and then the longer term. On the short term, there are plenty of things that we could ask governments to do, but the ones that really, apart from this affordable green energy, we want to ensure that there is a form of carbon leakage protection. So a carbon border adjustment mechanism that allows our industries within countries to be able to facilitate that transition and know that other players are also subject to the same rules. The government is also completely crucial in supporting the transition to more technology that we need in order to achieve carbon neutrality. We need carbon capture utilization, we need carbon capture storage, and we need research and development, and we need CapEx and OpEx assistance. So this is something that we really, especially in light of Bill Gates' absolutely right on assertion that we need that technology to come online as much as possible. It's just not the business case is not made right now, and we need those partnerships. Going to the medium term, a lot of discussion around the demand side, stimulating the demand side. Someone said, why is it that every airport on Earth is not required to use green cement? The demand is just not there right now for those lower carbon products. And it's up to our partners in the public procurement sphere to ensure that we get that, that demand side stimulated. So, and a crucial part of that is ensuring also, again, going back to that whole value chain, is that customers can recognize that they are getting a green product. And so common standards are really essential for driving the right demand and letting people understand what it is to have green concrete, have a standard, have an actual thing that they can look at. So development of those common standards is something that we would see as a crucial role for government to play. Energy efficiency was talked about as well. Anything from bamboo development in India that Mahendra Singh was discussing with us, to just policies that allow more use of biomass and allow us to use municipal waste. All of these are incredibly important for our sector achieving carbon neutrality. Finally, on the longer term, there was a lot of talk. Some people said, look, we need these other things. That's a great idea. But for me, it's really crucial and important and interesting, and refers back to this morning's discussion, that we need good carbon pricing policies that encompass both the supply and the demand so that carbon price is reflected across the entire value chain of the built environment. That would really help us to set policies and get us on the road to carbon neutrality. Perhaps I will leave it at that, with great thanks for allowing me to participate in such a really interesting event.
Well, no, thank you for leading the discussion and providing the feedback, and thank you to all three of our group leaders and the feedback. I mean, I think what's so exciting is how many synergies there are between the sectors. I mean, each sector is different and distinct, but in terms of the road to net zero, there's a lot of synergies that we can capture across the sectors, and a lot of learning and support the sectors, I think, can provide to each other. So really appreciate you capturing these findings, which is going to help us build on this seminar to continue to mobilise action-orientated coalitions in our sprint to COP26. It is now my great pleasure to turn to our co-host, the Foreign Minister of Denmark, Jeppe Kofod, to offer some reflections from the day and to reflect on the road ahead for the energy and industry transition. And I think particularly what I think has been so exciting about today is to draw upon the learnings and practical hands-on experience that you in your country have pioneered with the Danish climate partnerships. And I think in many ways, not only a great service to your own country and industry, but I think a great service to the world that, you know, and this collective endeavour of industry decarbonisation we're all embarked upon. Minister.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you so much also for the words you just gave us to the business community and also to Denmark as such. I think you're absolutely right saying that the business community in Denmark is very responsible, and this collaboration between public and private sector has been key driver for all of that. But I want to thank you, all of you in the seminar, for all the contributions today and also your recommendations. Thank you to the Mission Possible Partnership and all the important actors who took part in this strong coalition and take part in this coalition forward. The World Economic Forum, the Energy Transition Commission, the Rocky Mountain Institute, and We Mean Business. It is indeed a welcome achievement that 2/3 of global emissions are not covered by a net zero goal. Now we need to translate this into action. And I believe this seminar has been a stepping stone for accelerating the race towards a more resilient and just zero carbon future. I'm convinced that the ground has been laid for closer collaboration between Danish stakeholders and the Mission Possible Partnership, as well as the EU and COP26. The transition does not only need to be rapid and at scale, it also needs to be just and inclusive. The heavy industries are heavy on jobs. We need to ensure that those jobs are transformed into sustainable and decent jobs also in the future. This is crucial also to ensure public support, to show that that will also lead to cleaner air, a better future for our children, and the protection of nature, health, and homes. This is possible. According to the Mission Possible Partnership, upgrading to a zero carbon future can create 35 million new jobs within this decade. In Denmark, we are experienced in generating new and more sustainable jobs, and just transition is one of our core priorities. COP26 is right around the corner, as you all know. We must ensure that it helps create a high level of ambitions to fight climate change. Your interventions here today make me optimistic that this will happen. And I urge you to push your peer companies, your supply chains, your competitors, and of course your governments as well. I will push with you through our bilateral channels, through the EU, through the UN system, through trade and development aid at all levels possible. With the vast network of the Mission Possible Partnership organizations, like the World Economic Forum and the green Danish companies, we can turn the tide. And therefore, I want to again give a sincere thank you to all of the participants today. I think we got a long way and laying and paving the way for the more sustainable future, and that we all take on our part of the responsibility to make that happen. So thank you so much, Anthony.
Minister Kofod, thank you. and it's been a great pleasure. I know 8 months ago when we started talking about this event, we'd hoped to all be together in person. And I think we'd hoped to bring a lot of Danish CEOs and CEOs from across the Mission Possible network together for, a dinner and some inspiring conversations. So maybe one day we will be able to do that. But I think, this has been a great conversation, and I think we managed to pull together, many of the strands we'd hoped to pull together when we began planning for this event. So despite COVID, I think we've made a big step forward. So really, thank you for those inspiring remarks. And I know you have a busy program, so you need to depart for your duties now. So all I can do is thank you again for the collaboration and the partnership.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you to the World Economic Forum as well, of course.
You're welcome. So finally, I now want to turn to our forward-looking panel. We have an eminent lineup of speakers to bring today's conversations to a close. We want to particularly turn our attention towards COP and how we can use this important milestone, not as an end, but as a critical stepping stone to set us up for the marathon that we have ahead of us this decade, and really explore how we can make sure that we will land the high climate ambition outcomes and sector breakthroughs we need to set us up for that journey of decarbonisation. So I would like to introduce our panel, and then I'm going to turn to each of them with a question, and then we will open up with some more questions after that. So first, we have Henrietta Hallberg Thygesen. I apologise. Please correct me if I've mispronounced that. Executive Vice President of Maritime. Then we have Paul Bodner, Chief Strategy Officer and Managing Director at the Rocky Mountain Institute and one of our partners in the Mission Possible Partnership. And last but not least, Jennifer Austin, Director of Strategy and Policy at the High Level Climate Champions team, who the Mission Possible Partnership is delighted to be working alongside to deliver the net zero breakthroughs in the 7 so-called harder to abate sectors, the 7 out of the 22, if I remember that correctly, under the Marrakesh partnership. Henrietta, I'm going to turn to you first, if I may. AP Moller-Maersk was appointed to lead the climate partnership for the maritime sector in Denmark, outlining proposals by the Danish shipping industry for sector decarbonisation. What are the lessons, in your view, that can be applied from that work at the global level? And what are your ambitions for COP26?
Thank you very much. A broad question. So let me start by saying that significant value of the Danish Climate Partnership was exactly the setup that was the close collaboration between government and industry. And in our view, that link is crucial if we are to succeed with the green transition of these hard to abate sectors such as shipping. And we need to collaborate and we need to share objectives. The focus of these climate partnerships were on national action, but the Maritime Climate Partnership clearly also emphasized the importance of taking international leadership and promote the green transition beyond the national level. And especially for a sector such as shipping, that is truly international at its core. So now the task is to take these relevant recommendations and actions to a global level and enhance the ambitions. As we see it, then the shipping industry now have emerging but realistic line of sight to zero carbon technical solutions with new green fuels. So the 2 primary challenges we see is that we have to secure timely, adequate and affordable production of these new fuels. And in parallel, we need the infrastructure developments necessary to ensure that we can have the industry access to these fuels. So a key word, I would say, and Johanna mentioned the same from the shipping breakout session, but it's very much around the acceleration of this. We need to move faster than what we have been able to do so far. So my view is that there are already solutions we can pursue as an industry. So we need to go from talk and into more execution focus. In the debate about green fuels, we often hear from the industry or from regulators that we don't have the full overview, we don't have the technological viable carbon neutral fuels, we need more R&D, we are not yet where it's commercially viable. But we do actually have this line of sight of the possible solution that could have the long-term viability. So therefore, we should shift from waiting from big industry breakthrough elsewhere. Also, in our view, skip the focus on transitional fuels and then jump right into investing into the development of these needed long-term solutions. At Maersk, that's how we have decided to move forward. And we have decided to move forward even if we do not know the answers to all the questions we have. So very practically, renewable methanol is one of the solutions we see as a long-term solution for our industry. It's not the only solution, but it is a possible one. So that is why last week we announced our plan to introduce the world's first carbon neutral liner vessel fueled by methanol already in 2023. This is actually 7 years ahead of what was our original 2030 ambition. And it's worth noting that when we came out with that in 2018, it was actually a very ambitious goal. So the fact that we can now move ahead on this just illustrates how fast things are progressing on the green technology. And moreover, we have also decided that all our future Maersk-owned new buildings will have to be made ready for carbon neutral operation. So in very specific terms, what we feel we need now to scale the uses of new green fuels are development of the engine types for all types of vessels, development of large-scale power-to-X technology for producing e-methanol, e-ammonia, and large-scale biomethanol production, and then also the technology enabling safe bunkering and handling of these new fuels. That may sound simpler than it is in reality, but as I said, we believe we really need to start focusing more on the action rather than the planning. And in that context, we need some shared focus points, both for the industry and regulators. So we see methanol as a first step on the new fuels exploration, and hopefully ammonia will be one of the options for the next steps. We, as the industry, have to take some bold decisions, move forward, and indeed break this chicken and egg limbo that was also mentioned by one of the previous speakers. And we need these pilots to take place that Johanna also referred to. If we turn to the COP26, the question is what will now be the challenge and the task for governments and regulators. And there we do see that there is a big role for governments in creating the right incentives and ensuring a regulatory framework that not only pushes but also stimulates the faster development of carbon neutral fuels and technology, as well as the infrastructure for this. The governments need to regularly monitor what is happening in an industry in order to facilitate and support the viable solutions, and timely regulatory backing will be needed along the way. We also rely on the COP26 to send a very clear signal to the industry, such that the industry actually dare to move forward, invest and kickstart demand for carbon neutral options. We have made the initial commitments on Maersk, and we are now highly dependent on the supply and the infrastructure to follow along. So this is definitely from our side also an invitation to join us in an exciting future market development, where hopefully first movers will also have an influence on the market standards. Finally, to end where I started, we learned from the Danish Climate Partnership experience that close collaboration between rule makers and industry is crucial to accelerate the green transition. So thank you very much for the opportunity to participate.
Henrietta, thank you so much. I'm going to turn to Paul now. So Paul, with the new US administration in place, what role do you see for the US in helping to accelerate the heavy industry transition? And the US is probably not well known for its sort of coordinated industrial policy. But can it play a role in stimulating the breakthrough technologies, the demand signals, and the policies and financing needed?
Thank you, Anthony. Well, as we know, the problem that we face in heavy industry and making a rapid transition to low carbon is how to accelerate capital stock turnover. These are very capital intensive industries with very expensive long life assets. And in the 10-year time span that we're talking about for the decisive decade, you might have one chance to do a major turn on the asset base, if that. And so what we need to do, we all want the assets that generate the services to the global economy, but without the emissions. And so it's very important that that we activate the variety of catalysts that can actually accelerate capital stock turnover. And in its better moments, the United States is very good at playing a pivotal role in doing just that. It's obviously a big market. It's obviously a driver of global innovation. The government itself can serve as a major driver in terms of research and development, large-scale deployment support, regulation, and procurement. The US financial sector can drive change in the real economy via disclosure, climate alignment policies, and innovative first mover capital structures. And of course, the industries, including the ones we've talked about here today, the US plays a critical role. So the ingredients are there, and every one of these actors in an industrial ecosystem is essential to transforming that industry, right? It's not just industrial corporates. We've heard it's shareholders and banks and suppliers and customers and regulators. They must do it together, and there's an opportunity to weave together the actors that comprise industrial ecosystems in each of these sectors. And the good news is that there is a strong appetite for the net zero agenda among each of those stakeholders. Weaving this together in this way, as you suggest, has a name: industrial strategy. And it is indeed the case that the United States is not historically, except in moments of crisis, very good at industrial strategy. Certainly not as good as the European Union, China, Japan, Korea, other major economies. They have very different systems, but there are more tried and true ways for government and the private sector to work together in a coordinated way, even in market-based economies. So I think that will be the challenge for the Biden administration, is to do something which traditionally has not been done, to think not just about, as they ramp up their work, for example, in the financial sector, and activate as never before the Federal Reserve and the SEC and the Treasury and connect them in new ways, right? How do you make sure those strings of financial regulation and approaches are connected to something in the real economy? So it's going to be a challenge, and that's what I would watch if I was engaging with the new administration. Is do they have a strategy on industrial policy? Who will lead it? Is it the White House? Is it the Department of Commerce? Because the ingredients are all there, and I think you can see in the U.S. corporate landscape, the dominoes are falling just as they are in the rest of the world in terms of net zero commitments, but it does not necessarily automatically follow that all of those ingredients, you need a chef to combine those ingredients. And so we need to help the chef in this case. And perhaps those, Denmark obviously has an incredible track record in this area, has engaged your industries in this transformation. So you have a lot to teach the United States, as do others.
Cool, thank you so much. I'm going to turn to Jennifer now. The high-level champions recently launched the Race to Zero breakthroughs during the Davos Agenda Week, calling on governments and businesses to reach tipping points in at least 10 sectors before COP26. Can you tell us a bit more about this and what you see as the key sectoral priorities necessary to succeed in Glasgow in November?
Yeah, thanks, Anthony, and great to be here with you all today. And very pleased to be able to chat a bit about the sector breakthroughs, in particular, actually really inspired by what I've heard thus far throughout the panels today, because really this is the work, it's happening here already. These are the types of conversations that need to be happening now to help us achieve these breakthroughs by the end of this year. One of the big priorities of COP, including for the COP presidency, is collaboration. And so we know we need to do the work on mitigation and adaptation and finance. And importantly, we're trying to infuse a theme of collaboration into this COP, because the decade that we're looking at needs to be a decade of implementation, of moving into action and figuring out, we've made good progress on a consensus, a growing consensus that we can get to net zero by 2050, that it's possible, including in the heavy emitting sectors, as was mentioned here today. What we need to do is start to turn the corner into figuring out how we do that and what it is we need to do now and how to move into action. So that collaboration means not only it means governments collaborating with the private sector and doing that more deeply, sort of inside and outside the processes than they historically have. The COP itself, we want to make sure that there is a more collaborative feel and more interaction and genuine sort of problem solving there. It also means collaboration throughout value chains, as these groups have been discussing today. So it means companies on the supply side and the demand side. It means finance and investors. It means the policy landscape. It means civil society. And so looking at the map of sort of the full system that impacts these outcomes here and figuring out where and how groups can work together. It's been great to hear already some really specific examples. And as you said, Anthony, there's some real commonalities throughout there, how, and then the phrase chicken and egg that I've heard a number of times. In many ways, it is that simple, you know, recognizing that we're in an equilibrium now that is not great and that we can get together to a better equilibrium, but that there are things that make it hard for any one actor to go alone, recognizing that, you know, we need to work together in terms of economies of scale. And I think really importantly, what some of those choke points are throughout a value chain, recognizing that it may be at one transaction point in a supply chain, that material, you know, you're talking about, again, cement or steel, the margins are slim, those things are globally traded. And so at the point of buying that product, it may be that the cost of the green or lower carbon alternative, particularly in the early days, is more expensive. But even so, actually, for the person who is building an entire city block or a large building, that cost becomes quite small and nominal. And so it doesn't get bought in the individual transaction, even though it wouldn't be unaffordable at the end of the day. And so it's thinking about how, as has been mentioned, that sort of those costs and benefits can be shared more properly throughout a value chain or between public and private sector in a way that gets us to an outcome that is better for everyone. The work of the sector breakthroughs is then exactly this, bringing these sectors together. We have, as folks in this room and this audience know, seeing increasing momentum of private sector actors starting to make commitments to net zero by 2050. Really important big actors. We've seen many of them here today, you know, represented. Some of the biggest entities, whether it's the largest shipping companies, the largest cement companies, the largest steel companies, starting to make really serious commitments to net zero. And so the question is then how to action that. And that's what the sector breakthroughs are about. And so, as you said, we're partnering closely with the Mission Possible partnership on delivering breakthroughs in these heavy emitting sectors. So in every sense of the word, this is, you know, again, the work unfolding before us here today in this meeting. But essentially the model is the same, that the sector breakthroughs are working to set out sort of specific pathways with some near-term tipping points across these 20 sectors to represent something of a master plan around which businesses, investors, policymakers can unite and start to articulate quite specifically what actors have to do what by when, so that we're breaking it down in terms of who needs to do what and what some of the near-term pieces are. And our goal to reach a breakthrough by COP is to say that we've reached a critical mass of actors, and essentially and actors from across the ecosystem. And we basically are defining, you know, sort of 20% of major actors in different corners of the system being committed to that pathway as the tipping point, and basing that on a basic concept of exponential growth, that by the time that you've reached, you know, we know that these things sort of initially develop slowly and then emerge and then diffuse quickly as they hit an exponential growth phase in their emergence. And so at the time at which you're getting to about 20% of the ecosystem really moving in this direction, you start to be at, you know, sort of over the tipping point, and momentum is starting to take off, and that exponential growth is really kicking in. So we're using that as our bar, and we hope to use COP to showcase that this is real and tangible, and help bring that to life in a way that instills confidence around the ecosystem, instills the confidence in policymakers. The work starts now, because we know that countries around the world are working hard now on thinking about strengthening their national targets and thinking about how to achieve those. And, you know, that's an iterative process in which countries are hopefully putting out very ambitious targets and or doing the math to see how ambitious they can be, meaning that these conversations right now are really important, and that work will get done throughout the year, and that the COP itself is an opportunity to showcase some real specifics as to what that means moving forward. And I mean, the last thing I'll say is, of course, in this sort of in this time of multiple crises, the world is dealing with the COVID crisis, an economic recession, and a climate crisis. And not only are nationally determined contributions and the UNFCCC processes ongoing, but world leaders are getting together to decide, how do we get this economy back on its feet? The opportunity is now. We're at a decisive fork in the road as to whether or not that takes a path of high or low carbon. Certainly, if it takes a path of high carbon, we will very quickly run out of room and, in fact, compound the very problems that we're having right now. And so this is a very decisive time in which countries of the world are grappling with this and need to be hearing from the businesses, civil society, investors, and others to be working hand in hand. So that's the work of the day, and we hope that the COP itself is an opportunity to really demonstrate those breakthroughs in a way that feels like a step change. And it starts to feel different when you know that people on all sides are working together to move us out of the conversation that has been a bit too long. That is that chicken and egg of people saying, well, I want to buy low carbon products, but I can't find them on the market. Well, the other side is saying, well, I want to produce this, but I don't know if anyone will buy it. And investors are saying, I'm looking for deals to invest in and there aren't enough. And yet people are saying, I'm looking for investors. And so it's about sort of stitching up and getting into the details of that.
Jen, thank you so much for that overview. I'm going to get a little bit more specific now. Henrietta, clean fuels are a key part of the transition if we're going to get to net zero ship. So what do you see as the main challenges for the new shipping fuels, wherever we land, on the decision around those? And why does Maersk not want to pursue transitional fuels like LNG, as others have suggested?
Yeah, so it's clear that within the shipping industry, there are very different views on what is the path to walk on this. And I think that just underlines that we need to try to take steps out of several parts, and then we will see how it is converging in the end. So we see already now that we are having demand from customers and a number of progressive customers, but clearly we need more demand and we need that customer voice and that end user to come forward even further. And one of the main challenges is really in this deployment, and that will not happen without having the proper regulatory frameworks and the support. And we need to build scale. So I think Jen mentioned it before, it's how do we make sure there is actually sufficient supply we can offtake in order to progress. But that's why we said, okay, we want to take the first step forward, actually order a vessel, and now we are ready to make some very firm offtake commitments. So we hope that can start leading the way. As for the transitional fuels, it is it's a debate of where to go. In our view, LNG is indeed a fossil fuel emitting CO2 during combustion, so it will not solve the problem, at least as to the solution, how they look now. So we are currently concerned around LNG about the levels of upstream methane emissions in the production cycle and methane slip from the engines during the combustion. So that's the very specific reasons why we are not pursuing LNG. So we see the LNG technology presenting a risk in tying investments to a technology that could be outcompeted by real net zero emission solutions. So that's why we have decided to not, for now, invest in that technology. And it also highlights that we could be concerned about whether we talk about where our investments going. We could be concerned about whether the transitional fuels are capturing the regulatory agenda and the incentives and investment. So we're creating a risk of stranded assets. So we think we really need to focus on the long-term solutions rather than the transitional options. So that's the background for our stance on LNG.
Wonderful, thank you, Henrietta. Paul, a lot of today, the sessions have been examining the progress and lessons we can draw on from the Danish climate partnerships across 13 sectors. Mission Possible is very much about a sectoral approach, but in a sense that, taking industries globally. So, and we cover 7 sectors, but two questions really. In which sectors do you see the most progress and opportunities to deliver the sectoral outcomes we're looking for at COP26? And in your view, What sets the approach of the Mission Possible partnership apart from other similar projects?
Great questions. So as I mentioned earlier, I think we are at an exciting moment where the actors that influence the investment decisions of industrial corporates are all increasingly aligned around net zero. But what I think MPP does that's unique is that it tries to orchestrate those industrial ecosystems in a particular configuration that gives the right combination of confidence and pressure to actually draw a quantified roadmap to net zero, because it's that roadmap that's the key ingredient, at least in my opinion, and what we've been working on in MPP. So you look at the example of shipping, which is certainly far ahead. The shipping sector benefited from the existence of the International Maritime Organization, and that forum had the convening power, legitimacy, ability to commission technical work, ability to bring together governments and industry to forge agreement on a target. Now that target is not a net zero target currently, but the fact that the global industry agreed on a target for 2050 then allowed you to extrapolate back from the present to that future and create a very quantified metric to measure climate alignment. And it was that metric that the Poseidon Principles, as mentioned earlier, was able to use, because if you're a bank and you've committed to net zero and you have a shipping desk and you want to influence your scope 3 emissions, then nothing makes you happier than if your clients have agreed on a target and if they've agreed on a pathway and a metric that you can hook your lending policies on against. Same for procurement, right? And that's what led to the Sea Cargo Charter. Same for regulatory agenda. So all of these actors are looking for a map. And the shipping sector is a great example of what happens when you discover that map, because it enables all of these key stakeholders to hook commitments onto that map. And it's hard to do the work, but if all of these actors are doing it together, it becomes a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy that it's possible. And it's that model that we're trying to replicate in MPP, recognizing that shipping is the easy one in the sense that it has a global regulator. And there isn't a global regulator for steel or cement or aluminum or chemicals or trucking, right? Aviation is the other exception. And so in a sense, the MPP platforms are very powerful because they create the equivalent of a synthetic global regulator. By which I mean a forum that has the right organizations present with the right mission. And it doesn't matter that one of them is not some governmental authority necessarily, although governments are involved in the MPP platforms, but it's the right configuration with the right set of tools supplied by the MPP to follow shipping in setting a target for itself, not a theoretical target, not a modeling exercise, not a research report, but an actual agreed target and the pathway to go with it. It's hard, right? I mean, this is one of the most difficult things happening today in global decarbonization, realm, but it's necessary because the alternative, as we've discovered, is too slow. The Paris Agreement was designed as a project of nations. Its provisions relate to national governments. And of course, that's a necessary part of the global system. But a stack of 195 NDCs just by itself does not magically lead to a coordinated, effective, efficient plan for decarbonizing a global industry whose supply chains, markets, capital providers, and technology drivers go across borders. So I think that's really what we hope to showcase at the COP and COP26 is this model of sectoral decarbonization, and certainly
so Paul, picking up on that, let's come to Jay. We've only got a couple of minutes left, but this is quite an important point because the UNFCCC framework, the United Nations framework on climate change and the Paris Agreement, as we all know, public international law, sovereign actors, i.e. governments, it doesn't really provide an easy docking point. This is a point made earlier on in a question by Claire O'Neill from WBCSD. But the high-level champions, in a sense, are sort of carving a new pathway through international law that, and potentially, creating a hook for non-state actors into this international process. So how do we repurpose, in a sense, the Marrakesh Partnership to ensure that we're able to continue with that public-private connection between the sovereign and the non-sovereign, between the state actor and the non-state actor post COP26?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm no
You've
international.
You've only got a couple of minutes. Right?
I'm no international lawyer, so I'll skip that piece of it. But exactly as you said, I mean, the Marrakesh Partnership and the champions, the sort of kernels of that idea also came from the Paris time 5-6 years ago at this point, in which it was agreed and recognized that to move forward, for countries to have, as Paul talked about, it's sort of confidence and pressure, is for countries to have both the support and upward pressure to be as ambitious as they need to be with their individual commitments to meet the shared goal of the Paris Agreement. They need to have actors from the real economy, as we call it, on board. They need society and the economy on board. Importantly, they need companies and investors recognizing that they can align. We know that these are powerful influencers in every country in the world in terms of what is politically feasible, what feels economically feasible. And so what the Marrakesh Partnership and the champions does is provides exactly that, a sort of entry point. Though, we talk about the parties to the Paris Agreement, of course, are countries. And so then everybody else is called non-parties. But then, to think that the sort of real economy is the side show as opposed to really important to implementing gets it wrong and backwards. And so the idea was to have a way for those entities to participate. That has grown significantly over the last 4 or 5 years. No matter what the political wins in different countries have been, the real economy actors of the world have continued to move. The momentum is growing because of this recognition. The basic economics in many ways, recognizing that the cost of inaction is growing. The possibilities of acting are more and more real. The economic potential is there. We talk about in some ways as being bold leadership, like a Maersk goal to get zero carbon ships on the water in 10 years, and suddenly they can do it in 2 or 3, shows that we're at a point where equally there's a big risk of getting left behind if people don't move on this. And so figuring out how that recognition in the real economy can start to be a part of the conversation is really important. And so our hope already this year, sort of the Marrakesh Partnership and the champions and the non-state actor climate ecosystem has been very actively involved. The Mission Possible Partnership is one example of that, providing both the ability to bring the non-state actors together to align, but figuring out where and how to build those bridges into the conversations at the international meetings, but equally in a coordinated way at home, because that's where the hard decisions get made before everybody flies or Zooms to an international meeting. So that's what we're trying to facilitate and really anticipate being extremely important over the next 5 years and the decade ahead so that we can all get there together.
I love that. We zoom to an international, how that expression has probably changed its meaning in the last couple of years. We're going to finish, we can run over a couple of minutes. We'll have a very quick fire. You have 3 or 5 words each, literally rapid fire, to tell us what are your 3 key ingredients to reach net zero in the heavy industry sectors. So 3 to 5 words, rapid fire, we go now. Paul, your 3 key ingredients.
Thinking outside the box on who leads. This is the confidence and pressure model, right? And being willing to, sorry, there's more than a couple words, but I'm almost done. Being willing to transcend our traditional notions of government leads or industry leads and trying to really have a more of a yin-yang approach.
Wonderful. Henrietta, your 3 key ingredients, rapid fire, 3 to 5 words.
Courage, collaboration, and the willingness to act.
Wonderful. Jen.
I'm going to say be bold, be specific, and don't get left behind.
Thank you. I love, today has just been amazing. We have learned so much. I think this discussion at the end about how we build the public-private within the international process, connecting the business and governments and international organizations. Paul, I love your expression of the Mission Possible platform as a sort of synthetic global regulator for industrial decarbonization. it really creates the sort of vision of what something like the Mission Possible Partnership could evolve into, you know, a new piece of the international architecture, maybe something wholly new, not international organization, not private, but something between the two that really brings the public and the private together, bringing governments, international organizations and businesses together to sort of, in a sense, complete the international architecture around industrial decarbonization, which I think for a long time has been the sort of poor relation in the space. But as we see, everybody now is focusing on and understands the importance of this. So it just remains for me to close today's proceedings and bring them to a close. I want to thank all of our speakers in this panel and the speakers throughout the day, and those who've led our discussion groups, and you, the audience, the participants, and particularly for all the questions and input, and for being here with us to listen and take away and hopefully carry to implementation many of the ideas that we've touched on today. I want to thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Government of Denmark for partnering with us on this amazing event today, and for really sharing and bringing onto the global stage the lessons and practical examples from the Danish climate partnerships across the 13 sectors. You know, invaluable leadership, I think, in this race to net zero. And obviously, thank you to all of our partners within the Mission Possible platform for supporting this, the Rocky Mountain Institute, the Energy Transitions Commission, the We Mean Business Coalition, and of course, the World Economic Forum. So thank you, everybody. And it just remains for me to say goodbye.